It says I'm connected. Okay. Hi, Wolfman. How are you?
You want to know?
Can you see and hear me okay?
Okay. Not good, and you?
I'm well, thanks. Sorry your day wasn't so great. Okay, you said you can hear me pretty good. Hang on one sec, you might go blank. Hi, Gigi. How are you? Wolfman said, not good, and you? Yes, I can hear you. Okay, Gigi. Gigi, can you see and hear me pretty good? Oh, good, good, good. How was your day today, Gigi? Okay. Oh, good, thanks. Okay, so Wolfman is talking to Gigi. Good, good. Well, I want to welcome you both to my live. I'm having a couple of technical difficulties here, but look like we got them worked out. I'm going to give it a couple of more minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and get it started. Wolfman says thank you to Gigi. Yeah, Wolfman, it's going to be all right. And Gigi says it was pretty good. Okay. Your day was pretty good. Oh, okay. Good, good. I almost forgot it was that time, being in a different time zone and all. I'm getting all confused with the time. Okay, so it's is it 10:25? Am I looking at that time right? I think I'm gonna go ahead and cameras. Oh no, yes. Okay. Wolfman says I'm still here. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started, you all. I didn't realize I lost that much time trying to get this stream labs to act right. I mean what is it, Streamlab? Yeah, Streamlab to act right. While I was trying to get that to act right, I lost some time. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Okay, so we left off on our story where the Griffon and the Mock Turtle was with Brooklyn Chick, and Griffon had the Mock Turtle trying to entertain her with song, and he started singing this song and about soup. So now we're moving on from there. So now she follows the rabbit again, and she's back in the presence of the king and the queen. And you know, of course, the queen wants to execute everybody, any and everybody. She doesn't care. Okay. The king, Voltron Supreme, and Queen 73 of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards, and the knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. Near Voltron Supreme was Hippy Dippy 89, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good that it made Brooklyn Chick quite hungry to look at them. I wish they'd get the trial done, she thought, and hand out the refreshments they brought. But there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Brooklyn Chick had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books and more. She was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly every kind of position there. That's the judge, she said to herself, because of his great wig. That's the judge, she said to herself, because of his great wig. The judge, by the way, was Voltron Supreme, and as he wore his crown over the wig, he did not seem at all comfortable, and it was certainly not becoming. That's the jury box, Brooklyn Chick thought, and those 12 creatures, she was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. I suppose they are the jurors. She said this last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, and rightly too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it all. However, jurymen would have done just as well. The 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. What are they doing? Brooklyn Chick whispered to the Griffon. They can't have anything to put down yet because the trial's begun. They're putting down their names, the Griffon whispered in reply, for fear they should forget them before the end of the trial. Stupid things, Brooklyn Chick began in a loud, indignant voice. But she stopped hastily, for Hippy Dippy 89 cried out, of course. Silence in the court. And Voltron Supreme put on his spectacles and looked anxiously around to make out who was talking. But Brooklyn Chick didn't make another sound. She could see, as well as if she were looking over their shoulders, that all of the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates. And she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had to ask his neighbor to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over, thought Brooklyn Chick. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Brooklyn Chick could not stand, and she went around the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill, the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger with the rest of the day. And this was of very little use, as it left no mark on the slate. Harold read the accusation, said Voltron Supreme. Oh, this Hippy Dippy 89 blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict, Voltron Supreme said to the jury. Not yet, not yet, Hippy Dippy 89 hastily interrupted. There's a great deal to come before that. Call the first witness, said Voltron Supreme, and Hippy Dippy 89 blew 3 blasts on the trumpet in between, calling out the first witness. The first witness was Daron. Hold on one second. I lost my spot. Hold on. I gotta find my spot again. The screen went up. I apologize, you all. I hit this screen and it moved me from my spot. Okay. All right. Okay, what was your kind of position? All right, I'm gonna stop recording. Okay. In the very middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts on it. They looked so good that it made Brooklyn Chick quite hungry to look at them. I wish they'd get the trial done, she thought, and hand out the refreshments they brought. But there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Brooklyn Chick had never been in court of justice before, but she had read about them in books and more. She was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly every kind of position there. That's the jury box, Brooklyn Chick thought, and those 12 creatures. She was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. I suppose they are jurors. The 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. What are they doing? Brooklyn Chick whispered to the Griffon. They can't have anything to put down yet because the trial's begun. They're putting down their names, the Griffon whispered in reply, for fear they should forget them. Silence in the court, and Voltron Supreme put on his spectacles and looked anxiously around to make out who was talking, but Brooklyn Chick didn't make another sound. She could see as well as if she were looking over their shoulders that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates, and she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had to ask his neighbor to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over, thought Brooklyn Chick. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Brooklyn Chick could not stand, and she went around the court and got behind him and very soon found the opportunity of taking it away. Harold read the accusation, said Voltron Supreme. On this, Hippy Dippy blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read it as follows. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole the tarts and took them quite away. Consider your verdict, Voltron Supreme said to the jury. Not yet, Hippy Dippy 89 hastily interrupted. There's a great deal to come before that. Call the first witness, said Voltron Supreme, and Hippy Dippy 89 blew 3 blasts on the trumpet in between, calling out the first witness. The first witness was Tyrone W. Smith. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, he began, for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for. You ought to have finished, said Voltron Supreme. When did you begin? Tyrone W. Smith looked at Corey Ball, who had followed him into the court arm in arm with D.O.D. 14th of March, I think it was, he said. 15th, said Corey Ball. 16th, added D.O.D. Write that down, Voltron Supreme said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence. "Take off your hat, Voltron Supreme said to Tyrone W. Smith just before he sat down. "It isn't mine," said Tyrone W. Smith. "Stolen," Voltron Supreme explained, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of the fact. "I keep them to sell," Tyrone W. Smith added as an explanation. "Please do tell," said Voltron Supreme. "I've none of my own. I'm a hatter." Here Queen 73 put on her spectacles and began starting at Tyrone W. Smith, who turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, looking uneasily at Queen 73, and in his confusion, he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment, Brooklyn Chick felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court. But on second thought, she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so, don't you know," said D.O.D., who was sitting next to her. "I can't hardly breathe." "I can't help it," said Brooklyn Chick very meekly. "I'm growing." You've no right to grow here, my dear," said D.O.D. "Don't talk nonsense," said Brooklyn Chick more boldly. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace, not as fast as you do," said D.O.D. "Not in that ridiculous fashion," and he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time, Queen 73 had never left off starting at Tyrone W. Smith. And just as D.O.D. crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court, "Bring me the list of the singers in the last concert," on which the wretched hatter trembled so that he shook both his shoes off. "Give your evidence," Voltron Supreme repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, Your Majesty," Tyrone W. Smith began in a trembling voice, "and I hadn't begun my tea. Not above a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea." "The twinkling of what?" said Voltron Supreme. "It began with the tea," Tyrone W. Smith replied. "Of course, twinkling begins with a T," said Voltron Supreme sharply. "Do you take me for a dunce? Go on." "I'm a poor man," Tyrone W. Smith went on, "and most things twinkled after that. Only Corey Ball said—" "I didn't," Corey Ball interrupted in a great hurry. "You did," said Tyrone W. Smith. "I deny it," said Corey Ball. "He denies it," said Voltron Supreme. "Leave out that part." "Well, at any rate," D.O.D. said. Tyrone W. Smith went on, looking anxiously around to see if he would deny it too, but D.O.D. denied nothing, being fast asleep. "After that," continued Tyrone W. Smith, "I cut some more bread and butter." "But what did D.O.D. say?" one of the jury asked. "That I can't remember," said Tyrone W. Smith. "You must remember," remarked Voltron Supreme, "or I'll have you executed." The miserable hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and went down on one knee. "I'm a poor man, you see, Your Majesty," he began. "You're a very poor speaker," said Voltron Supreme. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. As that is rather a hard word, I will just explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this they slipped the guinea pig head first and then sat upon it. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Brooklyn Chick. I've so often read in the newspapers at the end of trials there were some attempts at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant until now. If that's all you know about it, you may stand down, continued Voltron Supreme. I can't go no lower, said Tyrone W. Smith. I'm on the floor as it is. Then you may sit down, Voltron Supreme replied. Here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. Come, that finished the guinea pigs, thought Brooklyn Chick. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said Tyrone W. Smith, with an anxious look at Queen 73, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said V, and Tyrone W. Smith hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. Just take his head off outside, Queen 73 added to one of the officers. But the hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. Call the next witness, said Voltron Supreme. The next witness was the Duchess cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Brooklyn Chick guessed who it was even before she got into the court, by the way the people near the door began sneezing all at once. Give your evidence, said Voltron Supreme. I shan't, said the cook. What do you mean, said Voltron Supreme. The king looked anxiously at Hippy Dippy 89, who said in a low voice, Your Majesty, it's your time. You must cross-examine the witness at this time. Well, if I must, Voltron Supreme said with a melancholy air. And after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, What are tarts made of? Pepper mostly, said the cook. Treacle, said a sleepy voice behind her. Call her, D.O.D., Queen 73 shrieked out. Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Suppress him, pinch him, off with his whiskers. For some minutes, the whole court was in confusion, getting DOD turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Never mind, said Voltron Supreme, with an air of great relief, so it seemed. Call the next witness, and he added in an undertone to Queen 73, Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness, you see. It quite makes my forehead hurt. Brooklyn Chick watched Hippy Dippy 89 as he fumbled over the list a time or two, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like. For they haven't got much evidence yet, she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when Hippy Dippy 89 read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name Brooklyn Chick. Here, cried Brooklyn Chick, quite forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen onto the heads of the crowd below, and there they lay sprawling about, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and began picking them up again as quickly as she could, for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, and she had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they would die. "The trial cannot proceed," said Voltron Supreme in a very grave voice, "until all the jurymen are back in their proper places in the jury box." He repeated it with great emphasis, looking hard at Brooklyn Chick as he said do. Brooklyn Chick looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste she had put the lizard in heads downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quite unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. "Not that it signifies much, but this is right," she said to herself. "I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other." As soon as the jury had little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pencils had been found and placed back in their hands, they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident, all except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit with his mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the court. "What do you know about this business?" the king said to Brooklyn Chick. "Nothing," said Brooklyn Chick. "I know nothing about this. Nothing whatsoever." "Nothing whatsoever," persisted the king. "Nothing whatsoever," said Brooklyn Chick. "That's very important," Voltron Supreme said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down on their slates when Hippy Dippy 89 interrupted. "Unimportant, your majesty means, of course," he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. "Unimportant, of course, I meant," Voltron Supreme hastily said, and went on to himself in an undertone. "Important, unimportant, unimportant, important," as if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down, important, and some unimportant. Brooklyn Chick could see this, and she was near enough to look over their slates. "But it doesn't matter a bit," she thought to herself. At this moment, Voltron Supreme, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, cackled out "Silence!" and read out from his book, "Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high to leave the courtroom." Everybody looked at Brooklyn Chick. "I'm not a mile high," she said. "You are," said Voltron Supreme. "Nearly 2 miles high, it seems," added Queen 73. "Well, I shan't go, at any rate," said Brooklyn Chick. "So write that down on your slate. Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now." "It's the oldest rule around," said Voltron Supreme. "Then it ought to be number 1, said Brooklyn Chick. Voltron Supreme turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. "Consider your verdict," he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. "There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty," said Hippy Dippy 89, jumping up in a great hurry. "This paper has just been picked up." "What is it?" said Queen 73. "I haven't opened it yet," said Hippy Dippy 89, "but it seems to be a letter of some kind, written by the prisoner, too, to somebody." "It must have been that," said Voltron Supreme. "Otherwise, it would have been written to me, or Queen 73. This is unusual, you know." "Who is it directed to?" said one of the jurymen. "It isn't directed at all," said Hippy Dippy 89, In fact, there's nothing written on the outside. He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added it. Isn't a letter after all? It's a set of verses. Are they in the prisoner's handwriting? Asked another of the jurymen. No, they're not, said Hippy Dippy 89. And that's the queerest thing about it. The jury all looked puzzled. He must have imitated somebody else's hand, said Voltron Supreme, and the jury all suddenly brightened up again. Please, Your Majesty, said the knave, I didn't write it, and they can't prove I did. There's no name signed at the end. If you didn't sign it, said Voltron Supreme, that only makes the matter worse. Don't you agree, my queen? You must have meant some mischief, or else you'd have signed your name like an honest man. As he spoke, there was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first clever thing Voltron Supreme had said that day. That proves his guilt, Queen 73 began to say. It proves nothing of the sort, said Brooklyn Chick. Why, you don't even know what they're about, little miss. Read them, said Voltron Supreme. Hippy Dippy 89 put on his spectacles again. Where shall I begin, please, Your Majesty? He asked. Begin at the beginning, Voltron Supreme said gravely, and go on till you come to the end, then stop. These were the verses Hippy Dippy 89 sprouted out. They told me you had been to her and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but I said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her one, they gave him two. You gave us three and more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet, said Voltron Supreme, rubbing his hands and his head. So now let the jury, if any one of them can explain it, said Brooklyn Chick. She had grown so large in the last few minutes that she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting him. I'll give him sixpence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning in it. The jury all wrote down on their slates. She doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning in it, but none of them attempted to explain the paper. If there's no meaning in it, said Voltron Supreme, that saves a world of trouble, you know, as we needn't try to find anything. And yet I don't know, he went on, spreading out the verses on his knee and looking at them with one eye, thinking, I seem to see some meaning in them after all. I could not swim, and you can't swim. No, not at all. Can you? He added, turning to the knave. The knave shook his head sadly and began to say, do I look like it? He said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of cardboard. All right, so far, said Voltron Supreme. And he went on muttering over the verse to himself again, trying not to make a scene. We know it to be true. That's the jury, of course. I gave her one, they gave him two. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, you know. But it goes on, they all returned from him to you, said Brooklyn Chick. Why, there they are, said Voltron Supreme triumphantly, pointing to the tarts on the table. Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit, you never had fits, my dear, I think, he said to Queen 73. Never, said Queen 73, furiously throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke, you see. The unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on his slate with one finger, as he found it made no mark that would linger, but he now hastily began again using the ink that was trickling down his face as long as it lasted. Then the words don't fit you, said Voltron Supreme, looking around the courtroom smiling. There was dead silence. It's a pun, Voltron Supreme added in an offended tone, and everybody laughed. Let the jury consider their verdict and moved on, Voltron Supreme said, for about the 20th time that day. No, no, said Queen 73. Sentence first, verdict afterwards. Stuff and nonsense, said Brooklyn Chick loudly. The idea of having the sentence first was clouding their judgment. Hold your tongue, said Queen 73, turning purple. You can't be talking to me. I won't, said Brooklyn Chick. Off with her head, Queen 73 shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you, said Brooklyn Chick. She had grown to her full size by this time. You're nothing but a pack of cards. At this, the whole pack rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. She gave a little scream, half of fright and half of anger, and tried to beat them off, and found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees upon her face. Wake up, Brooklyn Chick dear, said her sister. Why, what a long sleep you've had. Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Brooklyn Chick, and she told her sister all about it as well as she could remember. All these strange adventures of hers that she had just been reading about. When she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, It was a curious dream, dear. Certainly, but now run into your tea. It's getting late. So Brooklyn Chick got up and ran off, thinking while she ran, as well she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat still just as she left her, leaning her head on her hand, watching the setting sun and thinking of little Brooklyn Chick and all her wonderful adventures, till she too began dreaming after a fashion, and this was her dream. First she dreamed of little Brooklyn Chick herself, and once again the tiny hands were clasped upon her knee, and the bright eager eyes were looking up into hers. She could hear the very tones of her voice and see that queer little toss of her head to keep back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes. Still, as she listened or seemed to listen, the whole place around her became alive with the strange creatures of little sister's dream. The long grass rustled at her feet as Hippy Dippy 89 hurried by. The frightened mouse splashed his way through the neighboring pool. She could hear the rattle of the teacups as Corey Ball and his friends shared their never-ending meal, and the shrill voice of Queen 73 ordering off her unfortunate guests to execution. Once more, The pig baby was sneezing on Cheryl Freeman's knee, while plates and dishes crashed around it. Once more, the shriek of the griffon, the shrieking of the lizard's slate pencil, and the choking of the suppressed guinea pigs filled the air, mixed up with the distant sobs of the miserable mock turtle. So she sat on with closed eyes and half believed herself in the wonderland, though she knew she had but to open them again, and all would change to dull reality. The grass would be only rustling in the wind, and the pool rippling to the waving of the reeds again. The rattling teacups would change to tinkling sheep bells, and Queen 73's shrill cries to the voice of the shepherd boy. The sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffon, and all the other queer noises would change, she knew, to the confused clamor of the busy farmyard, while the lowing of the cattle in the distance would take the place of the mock turtle's heavy sobs. Lastly, she pictured to herself how this same little sister of hers would in the aftertime be herself a grown woman, and how she would keep through all her riper years the simple and loving heart of her childhood so near. How she would gather about her other little children and make their eyes bright and eager with many a strange tales, perhaps even with the dream of the wonderland of long ago, and how she would feel when all their simple sorrows and find a pleasure in all their simple joys, remembering her own child life and the happy summer days. That is the end of our story. Thank you all so much. Let's see who I missed coming in. Hello, Seven Lakes Ferry. So glad you could join me in my live. So glad you stopped by. Hi, Shiwana. How are you? So glad you could join us tonight. So glad to see you all. That concludes our story. And for those of you, most of you I think have been here. I'm trying to see if there's anybody I missed. I saw Wolfman. I spoke to Wolfman early. Let's see. Did anybody else come in? Okay, so that's the only people I missed. I saw Wolfman, Gigi, so Shiwana, and Seven Lakes Ferry. I'm so glad that you all could join me in my story time. I really appreciate it. I don't take anybody's time for granted or lightly. I appreciate you joining me tonight for story time. I'm going to go ahead and sign out now. I'm a little tired, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. But thank you all so much for coming by. Story time. We will not have story time tomorrow night, but I will have story time on Sunday. I will have it on Sunday. If you were here last night, I think the night before, whenever it was, I did say that I'm gonna have to move story time to every other night versus every night, because it's a lot that I put into preparing for story time, and it was kind of getting the best of me. So rather than do story time every night now, I'm gonna go ahead and do story time every other night. And if for some reason something changes with that, of course, you guys know I always put a little message out there to let you know that I've made some changes and adjustments. But I do thank you all for stopping by. I appreciate it so much. So always remember, until we meet again. Oh, Gigi says something. Gigi said, great story. Seven Lakes Ferry said, have a nice night, everyone. Gigi says you're welcome and thanks for the heads up. Yeah, so always remember, until we meet again, may his peace be with you, and I have a will to live. So good night, and thanks again for stopping by for story time, and I will see you all at story time on Sunday. Good night.